Okay, so hopefully you watched the video first and went over the homework that was on page 11. You guys had to do 4, 5, 7, and 8. So those ones were pretty straightforward. The number of electrons to share matched up pretty nicely. And then you had some review of ionic in your homework. So we're going to start now with page 6. So again, we're talking about what is the octet rule and how does it predict formulas in covalent compounds. So remember, covalent, they're sharing their electrons. Okay. All right, so we have hydrogen and we have oxygen. So hydrogen is, of course, H, oxygen is, of course, O, and hydrogen is a nonmetal. Remember, it's on the left side of the table, but it's still a nonmetal, and oxygen is also a nonmetal. So when we have two nonmetals, remember that tells us that it's going to be covalent. All right, so if we look up our electron configuration, hydrogen is just 1, it just has that one electron. Oxygen is 2-6. So hydrogen, it needs one more to be able to share with it to have its 2, because that's what hydrogen needs. Oxygen has 6, it needs 2 more to make the 8 that it needs. So there's 1 valence electron here, 6 here. And then if we look up the ionization energy, remember, ionization energy is the energy to remove an electron. So we have 1,312 for hydrogen. It's high because it has 1, and it's very close to the nucleus, so there's a lot of draw there. And oxygen is 1,314 because it has 6, so it has almost a full shell, so it's not really wanting to lose electrons or take electrons away. Electronegativity is your attraction for electrons. Sorry, attraction is what I should have wrote there. Attraction. So 2.2, reasonably high. 3.4, high because it has 6. All right, so we're going to do our rough draft. So hydrogen has 1 valence electron, oxygen has 6. So we can imagine then if we were to have a hydrogen here and it would share, and another hydrogen here and share, that would give our oxygen all that it needs. So we're going to have oxygen with its 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If we have a hydrogen here that they share and a hydrogen here that it shares. So now the oxygen has 6 of its own and 2 that it's sharing, so that gives it its 8. And the hydrogen has 1 of its own and 1 that it shares, so that gives it its 2. Remember, it's not big enough to have all 8. And the electrons are being shared. Now, something different and new that's on this one is, if you notice, we have these 2 pairs of electrons on the center atom. Those are called unshared pairs, meaning they're not shared with anything. Okay, so we have 2 unshared pairs. And unshared pairs are unshared electrons on the central atom. Okay, so 2 unshared pairs on the central atom. Meaning if there were electrons out here, those are not unshared electrons. It's got to be on the center one, the one at the center. Okay, so these are 2 unshared pairs that are on the central atom. And those will become important to us later when we're doing shapes, so they're important to pay attention to now. All right, so we have 2 H's and an O. So H2O is our formula. Our name would be dihydrogen monoxide. So we kind of just drop the extra O instead of saying monoxide. So dihydrogen monoxide, or of course, water. Okay, so same idea. We have a sharing of electrons. So we have our circles. It's covalent. So they're sharing, and it's between 2 nonmetals. So when we draw our shape, we're sharing electrons. Nobody's giving electrons to the other one. There's no arrows, there's no pluses, there's no minuses. So by having their own and the ones they share, they get their full octet. And then on this center atom, if there's any electrons that don't have a circle, they're not being shared with something else, then we call those unshared pairs. Okay? And then remember, when we're naming, we use the prefixes. Okay. All right, so let's look at the next page, page 7. So page 7 now, still we're talking about octet rule, we're talking about covalent, and now we have hydrogen, which is H, nitrogen, which is N. Of course, we know hydrogen is a nonmetal. Nitrogen is also a nonmetal. Hydrogen we know is 1 and has 1 valence electron. Nitrogen is 2-5 and has 5 valence electrons. The ionization energy for hydrogen we know is 1,312, and the electronegativity is 2.2. And I forgot to write down. Sorry, I forgot to write these two down. So, but remember, you get those on the back table. Sorry. We would expect this to be a little bit easier to remove an electron because it has 5. And then ability to attract, reasonably high, but it has to attract 3, so it's not going to be as high as the oxygen when we looked at the oxygen. All right, so hydrogen has 1, nitrogen has 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so if we can think about, nitrogen has 5, so it has 5 of its own. So it needs 3 to share to get our total of 8. So if we have our nitrogen, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then if we put a hydrogen on each side here to share, now it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of its own, 1, 2, 3 that it's sharing, so it has 8. And each of the hydrogens has 1 of its own and 1 that it's sharing to get its 2. And then if we look on our central atom, we have one of these unshared pairs. So we have one unshared pair. Okay. So again, our electrons are shared when we're talking about covalent. Our formula is NH3. So it's nitrogen trihydride. So we use our prefix. And then common name NH3 is ammonia, which is a very weak base. Okay. All right. So for your homework, you're going to go back to page 11. So you did 4, 5, 7, 8. So for tonight, you're going to do 1, 2, 3, and 6. Okay, so remember, if you missed it at all last night, now it's your second chance. Remember that some of them might be ionic. So last night's homework, remember you had silver bromide, and that was actually an ionic one. So you had the arrows. So some might be ionic, and you know that because of a metal and a nonmetal, and that's when you end up with your plus and minus. Some are going to be covalent, which is our 2 nonmetals, which is what we just did today. And that's when you're going to circle and share. So those were your ones like carbon and fluorine that were 2 nonmetals, or hydrogen and fluorine, those were 2 nonmetals. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, and 6 for you to try for tonight. All right, let me know if you guys have any questions. Thanks, guys.